What I want to do next is just give you a few tips to think about when you're building your application against the Open Graph. So the first one is authentication. And authentication really, really matters. You can't publish actions unless a user is authenticated and a user has given you the publish actions permission. What's important about this is you need to build authentication into every single one of your application's versions. In native iOS and Android, you should use Facebook single sign-on technology. On the web, I recommend you use the JavaScript SDK. One of the main benefits of the JavaScript SDK is something called fb.getLoginStatus. This is a method that you can call when the page loads, and it checks to see if the user is logged into Facebook and has authorized your app. And if they have, it returns their user ID and a valid fresh access token for that user. If that's the case, when the user comes back to your application after some times, maybe even if they haven't come from Facebook, you can automatically log them in, get an access token, and then as they use your application, you can publish actions against them. One other thing that we've added recently is something called authenticated referrals. Authenticated referrals means that when a user sees a story in Newsfeed posted by your application, and they click on it, and they haven't previously authorized your application, then the user will see the authentication dialog in Facebook before they arrive at your application. It means once they click add, log in, install your app, the moment at which they arrive to your application, they are already logged in and are immediately eligible to publish actions. And you turn on authenticated referrals, I'll quickly show you, in your application's settings. Here we are. If we just go to settings and click auth dialog, we can scroll down and we could turn on authenticated referrals, asking for email and publish actions. Save those changes. Simple as that to turn on authenticated referrals. So authentication is absolutely critical to building successful Open Graph apps. Second thing is permissions. There are two permissions that people ask for regularly that aren't really needed. The first is offline access, which is being deprecated. So if you're already asking for this, what it does, it gives you access tokens which have infinite validity. We're changing the way long-lived access tokens work so that if you get an access token via a server-side authentication flow, they'll have a validity initially of 60 days. If you get an access token through the JavaScript SDK, or it's passed to you when your application is loaded inside a page tab or a canvas frame within Facebook, then the access token will be a short-lived token, currently 2 hours by default, but you'll be able to pass that token back to your server and exchange it for a long-lived token, which will last again for 60 days to start with. And the second is Publish Stream. Publish Stream is a permission that allows you to publish all kinds of content to Facebook. It's a permission that again, users don't always understand why you're requesting it. And so with the new authentication dialog, if you ask for either of these permissions, they'll show up on a second screen of the authentication dialog. The user can opt to not grant you those permissions. So this is a view that basically you shouldn't need to see anymore. Posting to Facebook is me and accessing my data anytime. Instead, if you're building for the Open Graph, ask for the Publish Actions permission. Publishing actions is about publishing structured data to users' timelines, tickers, and newsfeed. And because it's structured data, and because Facebook can understand how to distribute it effectively inside Facebook, this permission, if you request it, is on the first screen of the authentication dialog. Number 4, object references. Object references allow you to link an object to other objects. So here, recipes to ingredients to add context around the application. And that allows you to do awesome aggregations like favorite ingredients. Not because of the recipes I've cooked, but because of the ingredients in them. Again, that's how Spotify, for example, does my favorite albums, my favorite artists, and my favorite playlists. And you do that by adding additional markup to your objects that link them to other objects. Number 5 is the sister thing to object properties, and that's action properties. And this is adding context to the action. So for example, I cook a recipe. The occasion or the place I cook it is a property of the action, not the object. So action properties allow you to add context to the action. And again, you do this by adding a property when you post the action into Facebook itself. Number 5 is an extension of that, and that is adding context to your actions through tagging places, tagging friends, and messages. Now, this have to be done in a valid way. When I'm tagging people, it's because they are with me. It's because they are doing the action too. Places, obviously irrelevant if I'm, say, a mobile app and I'm out and about. And then messages, it's important that the user has to manually enter the message. You can't pass a message parameter with pre-filled text that you've entered yourself. When you use the message parameter, you have to display a box to the user that they can type a message in if they want, and they click post to publish the action. Number 7, interesting one. One of the things about Open Graph is it requires real URLs. Basically, the URL that represents an object, you need to be able to do an HTTP GET on that URL and have HTML return that contains Open Graph markup. For this reason, you need real URLs. There's a common pattern on the web now where lots of sites are completely JavaScript based, where they store the state, the position where the user is in the app, using the hash bang design pattern. Now those URLs, because the portion after the hash, the fragment, isn't technically part of the URL, then if you try and copy and paste those URLs as Open Graph objects, they won't work. So right now, you need to have URLs, full URLs that actually represent the object. However, if this is your design pattern, it should be easy to create those objects on the web and make sure that they return HTML with Open Graph data. And then you can use redirects, so that if the user comes to those URLs, when they click on them, they end up at your Ajax URL design pattern. And you can do that 2 ways. You can either use a JavaScript redirect, window.location, because Facebook's crawler doesn't respect JavaScript redirects, or you could do a server-side redirect based on the user agent. When Facebook's scraper hits your object URL, if you see the user agent Facebook external hit, then you know it's Facebook and you should return HTML containing Open Graph markup. But if that user agent isn't present, you could say, well, this is a user using a browser, and redirect them to yourapp.com/hashbang and then your Ajax-based URL. We are working on escape fragment support, but it's not quite there yet, so stay tuned for that. 8 is how to update your objects programmatically. So the way the Open Graph works is the first time a user interacts with an object, Facebook does an HTTP GET on those URLs, reads the metadata, and we cache that metadata for 7 days. For example, if you're building a website where the price changes, or it's some property of the object changes, the title changes, or you have a new image for it, say, and you want that new image or that new data to be shown inside Facebook. Well, you can either wait 7 days, and after that, the next time a user performs an action on the object, Facebook will re-scrape that data and update its cache, or you can do it programmatically. And the way to do that is by posting to graph.facebook.com !ID equals, and then the URL of your object, and passing the parameter scrape equals true. And that forces Facebook to re-scrape your object and update the metadata. One of the things that we don't have yet is the ability to do that on a domain-wide basis. You have to do that right now yourself for every single individual object. If you have 1,000 recipes, you'll need to make that call 1,000 times. And then the last one. We've talked a lot today about publishing data to the Open Graph, and then that driving distribution back to your applications on the web, mobile web, iOS, and Android native apps. But the Open Graph has a ton of data, and you can read that data too. Obviously, as soon as your application has the permission to publish actions, you can read back any actions you published in, but you can actually read back actions posted by other applications too. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. The first is what we call vertical permissions. So we have built-in actions like listen, watch, and read, and custom actions like cook, like that I just created earlier. Now, if I ask for the user_actions.music permission, then I'm going to be able to get all of the listens from all of the music services I use. So if I use Spotify, Rdio, Mog, and Deezer, if your application requests the user actions.music permission, then you'll be able to read all of the listens that I've performed across all of those services. Likewise, if you ask for the friends_actions.music permission, then you can read all of the listens performed by all of my friends across Spotify, RDO, Mog, any application that uses the built-in listen action. Same with video and news. With Muse, for example, there's tons of applications writing in reads against news articles. The Guardian, Washington Post, Yahoo. If I ask for the user_actions.news permission, I can read in all of the articles that user or that user's friends has read across all of those applications. And then you can ask for a specific permission to get the actions posted in by a specific other application. So here, user applications : and then the namespace of the application that I want those permissions, those actions for. So here I could go user actions : SoundCloud and get all of the actions I've performed on SoundCloud, the sounds I've played, the sounds I've liked. And that's because this is the user's data. What this means is if you're building, say, an application that's all about recommending awesome music to people, then you could ask for user actions.music and say user actions : SoundCloud and pull all of the listens on those services, all of the activity I've done on SoundCloud, and use that to personalize your service to make an awesome experience for the user. And the way you do that is just by making calls against the Graph API. User ID /music.listens with an access token that's been granted that permission, or UID / in this case it would be SoundCloud : play to get the plays I've done on SoundCloud. So pulling data from the Open Graph in order to make your services awesome and more personalized is a very powerful thing.